Hey everybody, it's Jason Blaha here, and I had someone kind of ask me why I don't really talk much about core training. That's usually a big topic in the fitness world. I don't talk about it a whole lot, and there's a reason I don't talk about it a lot. So let me put on my +5 out of weaponsmithing. We're going to skill up my crafting a little bit, and let's talk about it. The ironic thing is, if there is any one part of the body you might benefit from isolating, it probably is the core. I do a little bit of core work, direct core work, and I have Brittany do a fair amount. But the thing is, if people train the way that I advocate in general, it is impossible for you to not have a strong core. You are probably going to have a much stronger core than most of the gym bros who do tons of core work. You're probably going to have a stronger, thicker, more developed core than they are. And it has to do with the way that I recommend that people train. And a lot of it has to do with exercise selection, everything else. But really high on that list is going to be the beltless training. Now, I see people argue back and forth on this, and it's interesting. The only people who ever advocate for this, and I think it's their personal bias, I do see a couple of people out there who have science backgrounds who do say, hey, no, use a belt for core training. Interestingly enough, they're all very serious competitive powerlifters who compete wearing a belt. All right? Yet, interestingly enough, there are also guys who lift more than them who are elite Olympic athletes who completely disregard the belt. They don't use belts at all. You need to think about that. There are people who squat over 600 pounds beltless multiple times a week who don't wear a belt ever for any reason. Some of the top champions in powerlifting, it's interesting, these same people who say this, I'm not saying that, someone being a champion means they're always right, but I have noticed a couple of the world record holders in powerlifting, raw powerlifting, kind of don't promote belted training. They believe in spending most of the year training without a belt. It's been like Dan Green, Jamie Lewis are on that list. These are guys who eschew training with a belt. Now, and even Jamie Lewis, he became second in the world in his weight class, wearing no belt in competition. He trained without a belt for that whole year going into powerlifting, became second in the world in his weight class when he competed with no belt. Then he threw a belt on and went ahead and became number one. He wore a belt for his next meet and then broke the world records. But again, that was competition in a belt. All these guys generally agree that their core development and stability is stronger if they train without a belt. Most, again, your Olympic lifters out there, because they have to compete without a belt, they train everything without a belt. And it's interesting, you see a lot of guys who maybe have weaker core. You see guys in gyms wearing belts for curls, guys wearing belts for side laterals. All right, these are guys who are in here just fucking around in the gym, and they wear a belt for everything. The strongest lifters in the world train without a belt, guys who have cores that are unbelievably strong. And then KK, deadlifting well over 900 pounds raw, doesn't even wear a belt in competition. The guy trains without a belt year round. His core is ridiculous. All right? Beltless training is a big part of it. You want a stronger core, ditch the fucking belt. Quit using a crutch. Number 2, look at the exercises I usually recommend. Tell people to deadlift beltless, heavy deadlifts, or even volumes of speed deadlifts. The deadlift will build a tremendously strong core. Every muscle in your core gets work on the deadlift. Squats, the same thing. You guys have seen me lately for people who want to be more athletic. I oftentimes recommend the front squat instead of the back squat, because not only does it train the core more, it trains the thoracic erectors more, it has better carryover to things like push presses. And the push press is one of the greatest exercises of all time for overall size and strength. And let's go over to that on the push press. Think about the core involvement with a push press. If you're push pressing, front squatting, deadlifting every week, you're going heavy with sufficient volume, you're doing all this without a belt, how in the hell are you not going to have a strong core? Standing work, doing tons of barbell work that you do standing will build your core. Same thing, barbell rows, Pendlay rows, power cleans. All of this stuff builds your core tremendously. And if the bulk of your training is centered around this, your core is going to get very, very strong. It can't not get stronger. Again, it's kind of like I try to tell people, if you do your chin-ups or your rows or everything with a narrower grip, it works more bicep without working the lat as much. I mean, while working the lats the same amount, you get free bicep work. Same thing with a lot of your training. Same thing with a lot of your other training. All this standing work gives you free core work. Gives you free core work. I do all of my training standing. The only exercise I personally don't do these days standing on my feet with a barbell is chin-ups. You guys seen the research on chin-ups though? Anyone looked at any of the data talking before about, and this is again, I recommend chin-ups. I am talking about core training when I recommend this. Chin-ups hit the back tremendously. The lats are a primary mover. It's a strong stimulator of the lats. It works the biceps as well as most curls do. It also works, like I've said before, it works the upper chest, works the long head of the tricep. Again, muscles that we don't think of as that sort of pulling movement working, it works them. But what else does it show? The core involvement, your abdominal involvement specifically. The chin-up and the weighted chin-up work the abs as much as crunches do. Now, if you're coming in and doing chin-ups 2 or 3 days a week, you're getting the benefit of doing crunches. You're getting as much core activation, not full core, it doesn't work the whole core. It works the abdominals as much as a crunch does. So if you're putting a heavy focus on chin-ups, your abs are going to develop. They're going to develop. And all your other work, if you're doing tons of standing work, if you're doing heavy standing work at least 3 days a week of various types, you're push pressing, deadlifting, squatting, front squatting, power cleaning, pin lay rowing, all these heavy barbell movements off the floor or with you standing, your core gets worked tremendously on every single rep of almost every exercise that you do. The people who are struggling with their cores and have to do tons of extra core work to get anywhere are the guys who are doing fluff and pump. They maybe do a little deadlifting and squatting with a belt, but they're sitting there on machines. They're standing around doing cable exercises. They're doing seated movements. If you do all your movements sitting down or laying on your ass, of course you've got a weak core. If you're doing all your chest work laying down on a bench, doing all your shoulder work sitting down in a chair, you're doing everything from overhead pressing with dumbbells and barbells and laterals while you're sitting down, doing everything else with cables, you're on machines doing work. All right, you're using machines for your rowing, machines for chest pressing, you're sitting down on all these exercises. Yeah, if you're training in that way, you very well might have a weak core. Yeah, you're going to struggle with athleticism. You're going to struggle to involve your full body in movements. You're going to be less explosive. You're going to be less powerful when you need to actually get up and move. Of course those people have weak cores, but if you're training in the manner that I tell people to train, how are you possibly going to have a weak core? You get up and you deadlift 500 pounds without a belt? You squat 400 pounds without a belt? Push press 200 pounds without a belt? How are you going to have a weak core if you can do that? It's impossible. Same thing, you come in and even do front squat. If you can front squat at least 3 plates a side without a belt, while deadlifting 5 plates a side without a belt, it's impossible for you to have a weak core. And if you're doing all this stuff, you're focusing on chin-ups, big body weight movements is the only stuff you're not really doing standing, or at least putting a big focus on these things, your core is going to be strong and developed. Now, if you want to do extra core work, that's still probably okay as long as you can recover, because you know what? It's not like you can have a core that's too weak. Having a strong core is never a detriment. But I do find it ironic when you have guys who are scared to do all this heavy standing work without a belt because they're scared their core is going to hypertrophy and get bigger and they won't have the little dainty feminine wasp waist that the gay dudes really, really like. Okay, that's cool, man. I mean, I can understand that, but then they'll come in and do core work. I'm like, you're going to come in and do sets of 20 on weighted crunches, and you don't think that's going to hypertrophy muscle? You don't think that's going to make your waistline grow also? I mean, it's ridiculous. The mindset of a lot of these guys is ridiculous as to why they avoid these things, but then they'll come in and train their core. You do know training a muscle makes it bigger. I'm just throwing that out there. It's generally how it works. Maybe there's some misconceptions there that training muscles don't make them bigger and thicker. You're training muscles that you're saying you don't want to get bigger and thicker. Think about it, guys. It's absurd, isn't it? It really is absurd. But then they're doing that because they want to have a dainty little tiny waist. Well, you know what? If you want a smaller waist, lose some body fat. That's the best way to get a smaller waist. Let's be honest. Your body fat level is going to determine the size of your waist more than your training will by a massive margin. The only reason you see these bodybuilders with big, thick waists is because they use drugs that cause it. But it's not just the fat around your waist, it's your visceral fat around your organs affects the size of your waist. I mean, if it's that big of a concern for you, eat a little better, do a little more cardio. But don't neglect training big, heavy movements because that's not going to work. And the same guys will then come in and do a bunch of crunches. And they'll do a bunch of core work. And then it's absurd when you think about it. But let's go back to the point. If you are going to train your core, what's the best way to train your core? Well, let me ask you the question. If you need your core stronger to help you squat, deadlift, overhead press, all that stuff, what's your foot position, all that? What specificity of training here? You're standing up when you do it. If you get hit in the guts in a boxing match or kicked in the guts in some sort of MMA fight, some guy kicks you in the guts, some guy punches you in the guts. It doesn't even have to be in that environment. What happens if you get out on the street and you're forced into a conflict you don't want to be in? You get hit in the guts. Usually, unless you're already down on the ground, if you're down on the ground, you're in trouble anyways, aren't you? Usually, if you're going to get hit in the guts by someone kicking you or punching you or even hitting you out on a playing field, ramming you in the guts, you're going to be standing on your feet. Do your core work standing. Standing crunches with bands, standing crunches with cables. If you're going to do extra core work, you're going to get the most bang for your buck and the most carryover doing standing core work, because that's how you play on a playing field, that's how you play in a boxing match, that's how you play in a street fight, that's how you train with your barbell movements. The movements that need the most core are the ones that involve standing. Specificity of training, specific adaptation to imposed demands. You want a stronger core when you're standing, you probably need to train your core when you're standing. The only other thing I might recommend for some people outside of that might be some hanging leg raises. You know what? Those are okay too. But you don't need to overdo it. You don't need to come in and do 5 sets for your core. All your other exercises are hammering your core. You want to do some standing crunches, do one nice high rep set and the end of your workout and call it quits. You don't need to put a big focus on it. It's already fatigued. It's already worked. You can't train in the way that I recommend people train without your core getting tremendously stronger just from the basic movements. It's impossible. Alright guys, but that's really all I have to say on that today. I hope it's been informative, and I will talk to you guys next time.